So now we'd like to welcome the panel to the stage. Could I have Phil Joly, Rachel Ana Dobken, and Kyle Pulley come up? Let's give them a warm welcome.
All right, welcome everybody. How we doing? My name is George Wacker. I'm with Lehigh Valley with Love. You can check us out at lvwithlove.com. But more importantly, we are here for the Lehigh Valley Music Industry Information Share Music Industry Panel. And we're really excited to have you guys. I was reading over your bios this morning and it's, wow, let's get started to it. We have Phil Joly, a Grammy Award-Winning recording and mix engineer, best known for his work with Common, Daft Punk, Lana Del Rey, and The Strokes. After nearly a decade of working at Electric Lady Studios in New York City, Phil built his first private production and mix studio in the West End Theater District of Allentown. We doing all right?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Rachel Ana Dobken, by the way, great with microphones, is a powerhouse. In fact, on her new record, which just came out in March.
Thanks. It's fine.
You good?
It's great.
Rachel has been described as blending heavy indie rock and soul, described as My Morning Jacket meets Amy Winehouse. She's been featured by Relix Magazine, Guitar Girl Magazine, American Songwriter, the Aquarian Weekly, New York Times, and more. She's worked closely with famed music photographer Danny Clinch, and she has performed with Ben Kenney of Incubus, Mike McCready, G-Love, Blind Melon, Robert Randolph. The list goes on and on. You can check it out in your pamphlet. And also, more importantly, her newest LP, Acceptance, came out on March 8th. So you can get that right now. Buy it, then stream it.
Thank you.
She played all the instruments on there, so drums, guitar, vocals, keys. Thank you, and welcome to Rachel Ana Dobken.
Thank you for having me.
And of course, last but not least, Kyle Pulley, a producer, engineer, and co-owner of Headroom Studios in Philadelphia. He's worked with such artists as Alex G, Dr. Dog, Hopalong, and The Humble and Shamir. He was a co-writer, co-producer, and bassist in the band Thin Lips, and toured the US and Europe with bands like Modern Baseball, Slaughter Beach Dog, The Front Bottoms, and Justin Pierre of Motion City Soundtrack. In addition to working with artists, one of the greatest privileges is getting to mentor his many younger producers. We're going to talk about this stuff, including those from marginalized backgrounds along their way to full-time careers in music. And when he's not working in music, he's helping his wife launch her new podcast. He also hikes the trails in Wissahickon Creek Park and hangs out at his favorite bar around the corner. I think we can all relate to that. So can we welcome to the panel, to the stage, please?
I didn't mean to give you such a long bow.
It was good.
My bad.
I know. I mean, that whole thing is in your pamphlet, so you can check that out too. So I want to get right into it, and we're going to learn more about each other. You can talk a little bit, explore some of these questions, and talk about your experiences as we go. You guys submitted a lot of questions as well, so I'm going to leave at least 15 minutes at the end for this hour program so that you guys can ask them. Let's get right into it for everybody. Balancing creative and business. This is something we talked about when we were on our Zoom call. It's something that I know a lot of the musicians have to deal with. In fact, you're forced to deal with it. So we talk a little bit about, balancing that 9 to 5 possibly, or your day to day, and then also being your, the social media person for yourself as well. And whoever wants to start out, please go ahead.
I feel like that's maybe a Rachel question first.
Okay. The balance, the work-life balance. I'm not saying I do a good job at this, but I'm trying. I think it's like accepting that there's going to be periods of time that if you're really doing this and you're really trying to hustle in this industry, I would probably say, I guess one could say like any industry now, but especially the arts and entertainment, is knowing that there's going to be periods of time where like you're going to have to just go all in and just completely commit. At least this is how it's been for me. Like I have a day job as a graphic designer, but I'm also obviously hustling as a musician. Like I just had a record come out, so the last 2 weeks has been like a lot of sleepless nights, like pulling an all-nighter to finish my vinyl design and like making sure that, I have to answer these emails so that we get this show in 3 months, So just kind of like finding that balance and knowing when you can take breaks. Again, I'm not necessarily saying I do a good job at it, but trying to know, like, I just think that now being an artist and a musician, like, you have to wear so many hats, and just kind of maybe like blocking times to be like, all right, these next 3 hours I'm gonna just work on content and social media and video editing, and then these 3 hours I'm gonna work on answering these emails, and then this I'm gonna take an hour break to go for a walk. So again, I'm not saying I do a great job, but I'm trying. It's a day-to-day struggle, but you know, then you have those moments where it's like, oh, your release comes, or you have a big show, and then you can take a break here and there. So if that makes sense.
Yeah, the hour break for a walk, or like dishes, or something that's totally not music related. I
Take
find
a shower.
Right. Those things
I don't do
actually. Those things actually tend to be super helpful for me when I'm like really trying to get some good focus in otherwise. So, you know, if I'm mixing, I take a lot of breaks to go do other things. Take a walk outside, take the kids for a walk, do whatever. So that when I come back, I can refocus, listen with fresh ears, see where I'm at, and kind of hit it. But definitely, I'm a huge list person myself. Without a list, I would be lost. Calendars, lists, you know. And then when I sit down to do the stuff, it's like I just do the list. I go down it, and I just try to stick to those items because I want to avoid the wormholes, you know, at all costs, and just try and stay on track when I can. And there's times to be creative. You know, if I'm in the composition stage on a project or something, that's a little different. That's maybe more of a late night thing, or wherever inspiration strikes. But if I have tasks to knock out, I try and definitely use lists, calendars, and just stick to those lists until they're done, and then kind of take a day or two and look back at it and go like, how did I do with that?
Totally.
Yeah, a really difficult, I think maybe the most difficult part about creative pursuits is the process of self-promotion. And it's hard. I know we all struggle with it, but I know that there's a lot of discussion about how it's difficult to be a content creator as well as a musician, but you know, I think to some degree it's kind of always been like that. There's this great story with Henry Rollins from Black Flag talking about, you know, in the early 80s spending like an entire day wheat pasting flyers for his show, you know? So there's just, the grind doesn't change, it's just what kind of grind there is. One thing that I've really found that's been helpful with promotion is trying to figure out a way to build that into your process. You know, I think so often people think, okay, I'm gonna sit down and now I'm gonna think about how I'm gonna promote this thing. And I think it's so much easier if you can just sort of build that into, you know, what you're doing, just, you know, make it part of telling your story. I often see bands, you know, that I'm recording, and, you know, there's one person singing and maybe 3 people sitting on the couch and watching them sing. And I think if they were, you know, some bands will say like, oh, this is an opportunity. This is what being in a band is all about. We're in the studio. Let's take a video. Let's take some pictures. Let's talk about it. So that later when you're like, we have a record, you don't have to be like, okay, we gotta come up with a funny sketch, or, you know, it's just, there you are. You're in front of a bunch of cool microphones. It sells itself, you know?
I like that, build it in.
Yeah.
Yep. Definitely.
I think too, like for me as someone who, again, I just went through releasing a record. I'm still in obviously the cycle release and in the process of doing this record, which from like start to finish now took about 4 years, because we started recording it literally the end of February of 2020, which you all know how that goes. So then we couldn't get back in the studio for like another 4 months, and then, but I had this vision, as like I'm sure we all understand now, like content is a lot of everything. So I wanted to film everything as we were in the studio, make sure we get like all these behind the scenes. And I had this vision of every song when we release, we'll do this like B-roll video that I'll release. And it just like didn't go like that, because it's just like, also I think, so in the process of also putting out this record, I got management, which has been super helpful. And what I'll say to like any of you guys out there that are like, oh, I need help, I need a team, just like keep going, take one thing at a time, because it can feel so overwhelming and impossible. But one thing my management also told me is like, be realistic about where you're at as an artist, and also like the state of the world. Like, sure, if you're gonna compare yourself to someone like, I don't know why, because I don't even listen to pop music, but I'm thinking like Casey Musgraves, like someone who's got millions of dollars behind them, who's got like a budget and a whole video team, that like no, if you're
I'm the same age as Beyonce, you know what I mean? It's just like,
yeah, but like arguably you're more fabulous. Like, I mean, come on, let's be real here. So like being realistic with yourself and saying like, I'm one person, or we're 4 people in a band and it's 2024 and we're just gonna do what we have to do right now. Like a lot of like going into the release, my management was like, you need content for every day. We need 30 videos for every song, and we released 5 singles. And I'm like, that's not gonna happen. Like that's completely unrealistic. I did it for the first song, but I realized I'm like, okay, if I can just get this one video edited, it's good enough to go on social media, that's fine. Like then, you know, so like taking these little bites and realizing like, okay, this is what I have to do right now. I don't need to think about like what you were saying, just completely spiraling and thinking about everything at once. I think it's especially like as an independent artist or as someone that's, you know, there's so much noise out there. Just remind yourself of that, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to being original too. Like sticking with what you're comfortable with.
There was a lot of talk, a lot of questions from some younger artists, some younger bands, saying, where do we even begin? So if you could if you were starting a band like today, would you do anything differently? Would you approach it differently? What is some advice from starting out to maybe talking to some venues or being able to play more regularly? What are some things you could talk to about that?
I think music is so wacky. It's so capricious. You know, there's so many things that are outside of your control, but I think one thing that is very important, that's very much in your control, is who you spend time with, who you collaborate with, and like what energy you surround yourself with. I mean, I remember I had a period of time in college where it was really hard for me to connect with people who matched my ambition or matched what I wanted out of music. And, you know, I had these friends and we connected over things like drinking beer and listening to punk and being stupid. But at some point, you know, they weren't really into going to shows. They were just like, I'm gonna just stay home. And so I just started going out to shows by myself, and I just started meeting people who were already doing the thing that I wanted to do. And that's where I met my business partner, Joe Reinhardt, was just, you know, going to a show and realizing we were in the same class. I think, you know, when you're starting out, you know, who you're friends with and what you surround yourself with is just really important. And you know, and sharing the same values.
Yeah, getting out of the house. That goes a really long way. We're all here today. Y'all have already made the first step.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think going off of what he was saying, I think that like a couple of things. I think community is really important, and I think it's interesting because we have like the social community out there and the internet, which is like, that's important, but it's also important that you're present with people in scenes. I think like, as someone who grew up in the Northeast, I'm from Asbury Park, New Jersey, I thought, and this was different because it was like 2015, I was like, oh, I gotta go to Brooklyn, I gotta make it. But now what's happening in music is, and George and I were sort of talking about this before, is that like there's these little communities popping up like tangentially from cities, because like cities are becoming so unaffordable for so many people, especially artists, right? Like we all need to still make a living making money. Unfortunately, this is like the one industry where success is not necessarily equated with making money immediately, but like to start. So if you can find places like Asbury Park or Bethlehem, PA, or even like, I don't know, Akron, Ohio. I heard there's a scene there. I haven't toured there, but I've heard there's a scene there. That's a good place. And then like, you know, same thing, finding these like like-minded people and realizing that like, you also may go to these small communities and be like, some other people won't match your drive, but just keep going. Like for me in Asbury Park, there's so much talent, but there's a lot of people that just, you know, they just want to hang out. They just want to smoke weed and drink beers and like go to the beach and play with their friends. And they're super talented, but they're not going to get beyond that level. If you really want it, you got to push yourself out. You got to go to a place like LA. Like I went and stayed in LA for a month, or go to Philly, or go, like, and start going to shows, start meeting other musicians and other bands that meet your level of drive, and start trying to play shows with them. Keep supporting each other. That's kind of how you start building that community. So that's just scratching the surface.
I didn't, I totally didn't think about the fact that there, of course, is a beach right next to Asbury Park. Like, that's a really tough thing to compete against. It's like, sorry, we're gonna spend 8 hours in the room rehearsing, and they're like, well, we're gonna go to the beach, and like, what do you say to that?
Yeah, no, and then the thing about it too is like for me, then it's like it can be frustrating too because it's like nice to be in a community where you have so much love, and I'm sure some of you guys can relate to this if you're from here. It's like you have the love of your community, and then you have to get outside of that, and it can be hard to find support, but you have to have faith in your art and yourself, and knowing like, okay, I have this vision and I have something to say, which is like what has brought me here today, because like I've met Ryan in passing, and it's like that's how it happens. You just keep pushing, and then you'll find your people in other communities. Now I have a scene in communities of people in LA that I know. It's not necessarily about knowing industry people. I mean, that's important, but that's the work, in my opinion. And it's not easy, but if you love it enough and you're driven enough, you don't want to stay in one place. It's really about finding a network nationally, globally, first in your town, then in your region, then in the country, then in the world.
That's a great point. I think that also is like, there's a theme there of like getting outside of your comfort zone. And that was certainly the case. Like I grew up in this area. I was born in New York, grew up in Allentown, moved back to New York for college, and then straight into Electric Lady, and I was there for like 9 years, almost 10. And then mid-pandemic, moved back here. We got lucky and got a house here in Allentown, and I have built my own studio here. And from the time I left to the time I came back, not only did I push myself out of my comfort zone, but also in returning, the scene here has changed and grown in such a cool way. And like I go out to see shows regularly. I'm at the Funhouse a lot. I try to make it to the Music Fest shows. Starting to come to the Ice House here to see stuff. Godfrey's. There's a great show at Godfrey's last night. And so just like going out and then coming back and seeing the community here growing too is really exciting. So I definitely think getting out of your comfort zone is good. And even if it's to go make a trip for a while somewhere in a big city, for me, being in New York taught me a lot. I definitely cut my teeth at the studio there and learned a lot. Worked with some heroes, but I gotta say, upon returning, there's something really special about this area too. So, sometimes going away makes you appreciate what you have here too. So, if not only learning from going out of your comfort zone, I think it can also help you appreciate stuff that you have around you.
And if there isn't something, you can build it too.
That's right.
And I think if not for the people who do things like organize the event today, or do these things in places outside of the big three, New York, Nashville, LA, blah blah blah, that's important too. So,
and I think that's going back to my point before about like there's this really interesting thing that's happening like sort of tangentially in all these like suburbs that are close to cities. Like, I mean, you could live here and be in Philly 4 nights. I guess actually I don't know how far we are from Philly.
Good point.
But like same thing, like I'm from Asbury Park, which is we're an hour and 20 to New York, an hour and 20 to Philly. That's part of why I still live there is because you can, this is a different point, but you can tour and be anywhere on this coast within 4 to 5 hours. You have like 6 different places that you can play. You could go up to Burlington, you can go down to DC, you can go to Richmond, you can go to Connecticut, whatever, Boston. So, but like exactly the thing, like why not be that person that's like, you know what, I'm sick of dealing with the city. Let me go build a studio in Kingston, New York. That's another music community now. Like I went to Bard and there's all these bands up there, now that are like living in Kingston and Woodstock, and because it's the same thing, you're like 100 miles from New York City. So yeah, I don't know. I think like same thing. I think I haven't really spent much time in Virginia, but I know a ton of bands that are in like Harrisonburg and Richmond and outside DC and Frederick, Maryland. It's like just understanding this, like we can have things like this, but we can all take this and transport it and then build that community mentality. And I think, like same thing, finding the like-minded people, because there's plenty of people who are now not in these cities that are like, you know what, but I'm still hustling and I'm gonna make the trip to New York, but still have my home base here.
For bands that are looking to do some of that, and maybe they haven't, there's some questions in there about how do I get the attention of a booking promoter? Maybe I've never gone to Harrisonburg. What are some tips to, if you're looking to take that next step to start touring, what are some things that you found that have worked or you've seen work?
Well, I don't have a booking agent. I do everything myself. And arguably some booking agents now won't even look at you unless you have like at least 10,000 monthly listeners on Spotify, which is a whole nother thing. But I think just for me, it's just meeting and knowing other musicians. It's just being like, I love music and I want to meet really cool people and I love this band and I want to like know more about them. And, you know, if they're coming into your town, like the show swap, I know it's not always realistic because you can't always be playing your own market, but just finding ways, you know, that's really how I found other success. It's just other bands that are doing the same thing and have the same drive and are like, you'll find a band and I'll say this all the time, be like, okay, like, where do you have a draw that we might overlap? Let's do 3 shows. How about Woodstock, Philly, New York? How are those markets for you? Do you have a draw? And then it's like, all right, I'll do this show with this band. So just kind of like thinking about it like that. I don't know. Again, I have always found the most success with other bands, not necessarily with industry people. It's good to know them, but that's my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts off with having just really sick music online that people can hear, and I think you kind of have to accept that maybe your first show. I always tell bands that I record, like, you have to play 5 horrible shows in New York till you play your first good one. You know, you kind of just have to go up there and sort of learn. But an easy shortcut, well, not an easy shortcut, but it's a shortcut nonetheless. I mean, if you're able to book shows in your own location, if you're able to foster other talent from other places and bring people through, like, they will reciprocate. And I know the people that have done the most touring and been able to get great shows all over are the people who also book great shows in Philly.
Yeah.
Totally.
Double bills.
Yeah.
Age-old practice that still works.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also think like there's something to be said about a space like this and like, you know, and I was talking to Ryan, obviously, if you can find or even make your own space, like I started in Asbury Park booking shows and running the music at the Danny Clinch Transparent Gallery. And that's just because I knew Danny and I said, hey, if you need help putting together shows, I can help you. But I met so many bands and people coming through town and I could pretty much say to my friends, hey, you guys are playing Brooklyn, like come down and play Asbury Park the next day. So if you can sort of find a place or even build a space, it's like you guys can make it so that you're making a thing happen or find a night a month that you could put a show together in a venue like this. Like it really goes a long way. And then next thing you know, you're like, wow, I know like 6 bands from Richmond and like 4 bands from Brooklyn and they're all awesome and they're friends. Yeah.
They're all excited to return the favor.
Totally. Yeah.
What do you think is more important right now? Or just talk about it. A live performance or a great recording? You talk about streaming and all that. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I think they're different animals.
Sure.
I'd say they're pretty different.
Yeah, I mean, it depends, but yeah, it can be pretty different. I mean, I think they both serve, I mean, especially today, I think they serve different purposes. You know, David Byrne has a great book called How Music Works, and he kind of talks about his life and career through the music industry. And it used to be that touring was the lost leader for records. Records were the thing you made money on. And so, you know, these acts would get tour support from record labels. They would get money because it was such a big production, and they would do these huge tours, and they wouldn't necessarily make money or they would break even, but it drove record sales, and that's why they did it. Now the model's been completely flipped on its head. The recording is the lost leader. The recording is the thing that, you know, proliferates through the internet or whatever. That's the thing that reaches people first, and then you're trying to get those people to give you some money to come see you do it in person. So I think they're both, you know, different sides of the coin, and at various times they've meant different things, and I think that's just what the reality is now.
Yeah, I agree. I actually kind of think it's 50-50. I think it's time and place. And again, all I can go off is based off my own experience, and I'm currently very much so in the thick of a release cycle. And I haven't put out music since 2018, so this is my first record. And actually, I realized, like, reflecting on this, the reason why it's taken me so long is because I am an independent artist doing everything myself. And I was like, oh, duh, like I'm trying to make videos and be a content creator and like play shows and book. Like I didn't start putting out music until September because all of the summer, every single weekend we were playing shows because I wanted to play shows. And that's really important to me, and I'm sure for a lot of you guys, because for me, I make music because I want to get out there and play and create and play with my friends and collaborate and be present in a studio. I don't do it because I want to be on TikTok or be on social media. But there are ways to totally use that to your advantage. And for the last couple of months, as you know, per the request of my management, because I don't think I would have pushed myself to do this, they were like, hey, you need to play the content game. You need to understand that if you're not out there, putting yourself out there, there's thousands of other kids just as talented as you who are willing to play that game. So if you want to get to the next step, you gotta like do a little bit of this over here. It's like the balance, right? And then we can get you the shows here. And that's what's happening now, because I just spent the last 6 months pretty much not playing many shows, but just focus on my videos and content and getting my streams up. And then now it's like they're pitching me for tour, and they're pitching me for these other indie bands that are maybe like, I don't know, 3 steps ahead of me that are getting shows all over the Northeast. So there is a process. Like if you just are kind of like, okay, I understand that I need this. I can't have no online presence because that's just not the way the world works now. But you also can't like let that completely consume and destroy you, because I've definitely been there. And for me, I'm like, I just want to play shows. But also, just playing shows really doesn't make you money, and then you're in the red all the time. So you have to figure out a smart way to do it that you're like, okay, again, maybe you have a day job. Pretty much all of us have to have day jobs now, even if you're a very successful touring musician. So I just think, again, realizing that everything has a time and place, and like if you feel like you're drowning in one area, you're like, okay, this is what it's like right now, but like in like 3 months when this record's out or when like this single's out, like I won't need to worry about this anymore. I can like pivot my focus. And it's just a lot of that juggling until you continue to build the team. And like I will also say, like I happened to hire a social media woman to run meta ads for me the last 6 months. I would not have been able to do that. So, you know, it's money, but if you can invest in those things, it's worth it, because at least that'll help. Anyway, whatever, I'm just rambling.
That's good. Keep rambling.
Whatever.
Let's talk about the studio a little bit. You know, what are some things that musicians can look for in a studio that makes for a good environment? And then could you talk a little bit about what a good producer does, or a good sound engineer?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess the first part of the question is it that what can an artist look for in a studio, or how they can they vet?
What are good things to look for when approaching a studio?
Well, I mean, I think you want to. Something I try to do with artists when I'm talking to them is sort of establish a common language. You know, I want to know that they're familiar with my work. I want to know what influences they have. I want us to, you know, have sort of a creative rapport. And I think, you know, you can sort of get a vibe of that when you're talking to different studios, just how people react to your questions, or how they, you know, how much time they give, how responsive they are. So I think just vetting, you know, going and meeting people as an artist in person, I think it's really important to notice how people treat the small things. How people treat the small things is how they treat, you know, how they'll handle the bigger stuff. So, you know, if you get a good vibe, I think that's a great start. Something I think is on the other side of the glass, I like to think of my job as sort of like a technical party host, you know, because I think it's a lot of the same sort of skills. Like you want to make people to feel welcome. Like here, you know, let me take your coat. Would you like another drink? You know, but just try to get people to feel very comfortable. You're just sort of detail oriented, putting people at ease so that they can make their art, and then you're also trying to just, you know, catch the little details that are falling through the cracks, like your guitar's out of tune, you know, there's dip in the other room, you know, so...
Don't forget about the dip.
Don't forget about the dip. So, yeah, I think that's, I mean, you know, everybody has the same tools, or not everybody, but I mean, you know, a lot of people have the same tools, the same microphones and whatnot. And it's really, to me, like the difference between a producer and an engineer is the human element and how you're able to respond emotionally to the artist and bring things out, and, you know, and be a fun guy to hang out with for 10 hours, because you're going to be stuck in a room. So, you know, just keep that in mind when you're talking to people. You're going to have to spend, you know, 10 to 12 hours. And, yeah.
Yeah. I always recommend artists to empower themselves by learning how to record as much as you feel comfortable with, as much as you want to, but at least as much to make yourself a good demo. And that could be really simple. That could be like an iPhone recording at a certain distance from you that you like. But in any way, if you can get yourself to a space where you can make yourself a good demo that you feel represents the song in a good light, a studio producer, engineer is going to be able to help you a lot further. And I think along that path, a lot of people find out, oh, I actually really like adding layers to my demo, or maybe working in like GarageBand or Logic or whatever when you're starting out. And now I can start to be more creative and start to dream a little bit and start to kind of expand this idea a little further. And then that's only going to help the process with a producer or an engineer, I think, because it's going to help to establish that common language, and developing that rapport also, I think, develops like a two-way street of respect, where you're kind of both speaking and starting to understand each other's ideas beyond, just let's make a record.
I was going to say real quick too, I always tell people as much as possible, I mean, to make demos, because it helps me, but I really think it helps themselves. I think, you really want to, as much as you can, you really want to put yourself in the shoes of the end user of what you're making. You want to put yourself in the position of the listener, and it's really hard to be critical. Like while you're doing it, you're like, man, this guitar intro is sick. I love playing this. Like, this is awesome. And then I am having a great time playing this guitar intro. I'm so glad that it's 4 minutes long. And then maybe you record it and then you listen to it and you're like, wow, I am freaking bored. So, I mean, something as simple as that. I mean, just something as simple when you're all playing together in this, basement or this rehearsal room. It sounds terrible. You can't really hear what you're doing, but when you put it down on tape, you're like, oh yeah, I always hit an open string there. Or like, oh, that note doesn't totally work. Or like, that feels kind of stepping on the blah, blah, blah. So,
right. Getting to some of that before you get in the studio is good.
Yes, yeah. I mean, sometimes some sessions turn into guitar lessons and band practice, but it's not preferable, so.
Well, and there's times where I've had people bring stuff that's, they're like, this is an idea of something, and they're like a lot further along than I think they realize too.
Yeah.
So
totally,
I think it's a good path to go.
It's always really constructive to hear things back, like both from a performative standpoint, but also in the studio. Like, you really don't know something until you're like, oh wow. Oh, this sounds great, or this is terrible. Like, you're totally right. I think from the artist perspective, well, twofold, like what you're asking, like for me, it's definitely about finding the right producer and the person you vibe with. Like, yeah, a great studio is a great studio, and it happens to be that a lot of times the great studios have great engineers and producers there, but like, knowing that you vibe with the people that are working there, or like for me, I always seek out the producer first versus the studio, because I'd rather, like you say, the human element. I'm, as I'm sure most of you are, as we all are artists, very sensitive and in my own head 99% of the time. So having someone that can be sort of like the yin to my yang in the creative process, to just be like, hey, you know what, I think we need to take 5. We need to just go outside. Or like, your bass player's really pissing you off, you're like, just go smoke a cigarette, please. Like, stop. Just please. Just so I think, but that really comes down to like finding someone that you vibe with. And it's interesting because for me, I did this last record terribly, like the worst way. I did I had this vision to do different batches of songs with different producers, and I thought, wow, this would be great. I'll take like this hip hop approach. But like when you're recording like an analog record with analog drums, like no, you're working on like 5 records at once, and you spend a lot of money and you waste a lot of time. So I ended up only really doing it with 2 producers, because some of the people was just didn't jive. And I think too, also like recognizing like sometimes you're just not gonna jive with people. You're in like, don't like drive yourself crazy trying to like fit into, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. It's not personal.
A lot of times I have people come and say like, I have these 5 songs, I have these 10 songs, and I almost always say, let's start with 1 and see how it goes, and then go from there.
It depends how much experience they have in the studio, but I always say like, if there's such a learning curve, and once you get on the other end of this, you're going to say like, oh, I wish I did X, Y, Z. And so, yeah, depending on their experience level, I always encourage starting out with 1 or 2. So,
yeah. What are some things beyond music, some non-musical skills that are essential as you're starting out or you're booking these gigs, miles away? What are some musical skills that you guys have found are helping you? Like business-wise, stuff like that. You found out like, oh man, I have to do this.
Yeah, I was fortunate. We talked about this in our Zoom call, but my father had a demolition and firewater damage restoration business. So I worked there many summers pumping water out of basements. That's not really the skill you want to know. But
All three of us have water remediation.
yeah, exactly.
Current water in my basement right now. Again, by the way.
Oh, terrible. But I did look. Getting to watch my father lead a team of people and mentor people. Learning about marketing, reading kind of the books about sales or books about leadership or books about those kind of sort of core business skills. That really, when they say business, some of it is like the accounting stuff, that's numbers, that's business, but a lot of business is really just people. It's just learning how to learning how to work with people in a constructive way. And so I think that has been a skill that's helped me, or at least I'm trying to help it. So
Yeah, I agree. Definitely a lot of the business. I think the most important part of the business is the people, 100%. I have found it really empowering to start my own small business and to learn some of the stuff around taxes and how you can learn the right things that can actually help your business grow. And that's a surprise to me. I never thought that would be something I would be at all passionate about. But that is something that as I've grown, I've kind of become like, oh, this is actually really interesting, and part of what I could see helping everyone along the way, honestly. So I think that is a thing that people could look at some point.
learning how to write off that burrito.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. That
Exactly. That easy pass toll over the bridge for the gig to Mercury Lounge. Anyway, so yeah, it's like $50 now to drive to New York. Are you kidding? It's ridiculous. Anyway, so another reason why we should all just boycott New York City and just start all of our own scenes where we're at right now. So I think going off what both these wonderful gentlemen said, yes, totally. You have to remember that if you are doing this in a serious capacity, like music is a business, and there's decisions you need to make as a business, and and I have to admit again, as an artist that cares about my friends and people and wants to let them come into my shows and all this, having management now has been eye-opening, because they're very much so we're managing your business and your money. No, you're not going to charge $25 for vinyl. You're going to charge $30 because this is how much it costs you, and this is your overhead. Knowing things like that, I also think skill-wise, something that's been very, very beneficial for me, and I'm grateful and lucky because I am a visual artist. But I taught myself all of the video editing programs, everything from Premiere to CapCut, because again, as much as I'd love to say content doesn't matter, it really does. And to see the difference between I put in an extra 2 hours to put a video together when I released the song and the record on Friday, and now it's got 500 likes versus 100, and then 100 new followers or whatever. These things you realize oh wow, okay, this does make a difference. But you'll save yourself, you might not save yourself time, but if you're again a DIY artist and you have a vision, you might as well teach yourself how to use some of these programs, video programs and video editing, because next thing you know, it's you're a video editor and you can do everything yourself. I guess the moral of the story is I've learned how to do as much as I possibly can myself, because 2 reasons. 1, to save money, and 2, because I want to be self-sufficient and I have a vision. So I know I'm putting out this video and this is exactly how I want it to look with my brand and my sound. And I found that to be not only empowering, but also I can sleep at night.
Well, it sounds like that aspect of it is an extension of your creativity.
Yeah.
It's an extension of your artistry, and I think that's a helpful reframing to think about a lot of the stuff. It's not stuff you got to do.
Totally.
It can be just trying to make it fun in some kind of way.
Yeah, to remind yourself, even I did the design for my vinyl, and I realized wow, this is such an important part of being an artist and having a vision. Especially, I don't know about you guys, but I'm a vinyl collector, and I love seeing the artistry behind that stuff. So rather than stressing out for the hours it took, reframing and saying, this is part of my vision and this is really important, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, as I've been building this studio in Allentown, I've learned how to frame walls, frame floors. I've dropped, tons of 2A modified stone in between the floor to make sure it didn't resonate. A lot of stuff that I never foresaw myself doing, but I really care about it, and it's been super.
As long as you can keep all your fingers.
That's right. Yeah.
That's
so
the
far
catch.
so good. So far so good. But yeah, you're absolutely right. But it has been super empowering, and I gotta say, when I'm in there working, I feel amazing because I know that I've done that work too. And I would imagine it's the same way when you see your music video back. It's like the work that went into it. It makes you feel good. It doesn't feel like a chore at all.
So I have a ton of questions, but I want to make sure, because I know a lot of people submitted as well. So I will open it up. We have some time left. Is there anyone who wanted to ask a question? And if not, then I will continue with mine. Yes, in the back.
So I just wanted to ask you guys what your opinion is on working on an album and getting to the point where you're almost getting sick of hearing your own stuff before the public hears it for the first time. Because we're in the middle of that process where I'm like, I heard this a million times now,
Great question.
Oh man, yeah, it's such a funny thing. Bands will spend so much time on a record, and then they're like, "Oh, but we gotta write some new music." It's like, dude, this is new music to everybody else, But something I would say is, and it's actually could be beneficial too, is some of the best bands that I've seen, some of the best live shows are reinventing your music for the live show. Figuring now is the time for that 4-minute guitar intro. Not the record. Now's the time to create cool little interludes. You can change things up. You can have sections where maybe the whole band drops out and it's just you singing. I think it can be compelling to reinterpret your music for a live setting, and it'll spice it up a little bit too. So, but yeah, I hear you. It's tough to hear the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, I've been there. I completely understand. I've had meltdowns and was I was working on this record for 4 years and it was super frustrating. And I mean, I had one person mix it and I hated the way he mixed it. It was so compressed and thin. And I'm like, why does everything need to sound this way? My music's kind of living in this 70s rock world. I'm like, no, we need thick. We need low end. We know. So I then had to go and have someone else remix it. Ironically, my record's called Acceptance, and my bandmates were like, Rachel, life imitate art. It's done. You need to accept that it's done. You need to just turn the page. So I think my advice would be there was a period of time where I absolutely hated this record. I was crying. I was like, I can't hear it. I can't hear this guitar. Why can't I hear it? When the vocals, the drums was and you just gotta accept that you're really close to the fire, and that first of all, when it comes out to the world, everyone's gonna be stoked, and eventually, finish what you gotta do. You gotta make the decisions on the mix and mastering notes. Just power through, try and be as objective as possible. This is something that I have learned. Don't take too many people's advice. I was doing that. And I had a bunch of people sort of buzzing in my ear that were I don't know, the low end is kind of heavy. And then someone else is the guitars are too searing and loud. And I don't know, it's gonna be really compressed when you hear it on Spotify. That was another thing that I've realized, putting out a record in 2024 versus 2018, there's no way to get a basic baseline understanding, what is this gonna sound like? It's a maddening. You're earbuds, headphones, out in the world, in my car. It's everything sounds different. So I think just being yo, this is good. Does this feel right? Does this feel good? Are we happy with this? Right. And just let it ride and just don't listen to it until it's out.
Yeah, it's the Wild West out here. You got to go with what you like.
Yeah.
I do say though, as a producer, a lot of times my recommendation is to artists that are up and coming is that time is one of the few luxuries that we do have on our side when you're on the way up. So one of the things I often say is take a week away from it or longer if you can, and then sit down with a cup of coffee, or if you're a coffee drinker, first thing in the morning when your ears are fresh, listen, don't stop the song and do anything, just write notes and then walk away. And the next day, come back and address those notes.
That's good advice. She told me that.
That's a great question. I see another hand in the back. You be a little loud.
Yeah, What's your advice to my kids as far as, especially the promotion and business side, on how to save time? Because the more you got into it, okay, I gotta get on Spotify, I gotta promote on Instagram. The more aspects you get into it, the more time you're adding into it. What are some tips to like save time?
How do you do? We had talked about this on that Zoom. You're everything. It's DIY, but they added more stuff to it. How do you not get mad at that and get through it?
I think it's just like anything else. You just have to find, it's just about organizing your time. I mean, just creating systems in order to do those things. Maybe a few years ago, I just found like it was just so overwhelming for me to try to, I was like, how am I supposed to tell people I'm busy making records when I'm busy making records? Like, how am I supposed to, how am I supposed to do all these things that are helpful to my recording studio business while I'm just making sure I'm just staying on top of deadlines? And, it required a certain amount of intentionality and a certain amount of, putting certain days aside or organizing my time in such a way or collaborating or training people to help you. There's no easy answer, but I think just trying to build it into your process, and also it's tough when it sounds like Rachel is doing a lot of it just herself, but if you're part of a band, if you can kind of specialize within within your group of people that are working on this project, that can also be helpful too. And different people have ownership of different parts of the process. So
I can definitely relate to what Kyle's saying about how do I get the message out there while I'm keeping up with deadlines. And what I've come up with is, like I said, lists, put it on the calendar, just knock out those lists and try not to get sidetracked. But then on top of that, the second thing I find really helpful is when I have these moments where I'm out there late doing mix changes or whatever, and I have to wait for stems to print. When I do feel inspired, I try and snap a photo of anything and just put it up there.
Good idea.
So like leaning into those moments where you actually feel inspired, and it's like, it might not be perfect, it might not be a video with sound, it might just be an image, whatever. When you feel inspired, just use that to just blast onto the internet and then just kind of keep it moving with your list.
Yeah, less thinking, more doing. I think, like for me, again, and I can only go based off my own experience, like I've definitely had my days, even weeks where I was like, I don't want to do anything. I don't even want to get out of bed today because I'm so overwhelmed. I think that like speaks to life in general, especially as like adults trying to function and like make money. And you start thinking all these things, you're like, oh, when am I going to like have time for laundry? Like, what is this? But I think for me, as much as I can stay out of my head and just taking it one thing at a time, which again, I don't always do the best job at, but having people like, yes, I do everything myself, but I'm super grateful and lucky now that I have management. They're very good at keeping me organized and on top of my things. But yeah, really just like as much as you can keep to a schedule or like organized, which again, I'm not really great at that, but I try. And it's also like an opportunity to just continue to get better. And I think also giving yourself the grace period of knowing like, you know what, I'm gonna have my days where I just like, I can't get everything done. And I'm just like having a bad day, or like, especially if something on that to-do list is like, hey, I need to be creative right now, right? That's like the big irony is like having to give yourself a deadline to be creative, which isn't the easiest thing to do all the time. But if you can just say, all right, you know what, I'm gonna get these lyrics done. It's gonna be what it's gonna be. I'm just gonna like free write. I'm just gonna do this thing. Or like, like Phil was saying, like if you have a moment where you're just like, oh great, I'm just gonna put this photo or this video up. I'm not gonna think too much about this because I don't need to. I think those are the moments that are just like lean into that and know that one day you're gonna feel great, the next day you might not, but like that's how everything is in life. That's what's helped me.
Yeah, I try to have like one day a week. That's sort of my admin day that I know I'm not going to get anything music related done. It's just going to be emails, just going to be phone calls, just going to be social media, just going to be all the stuff. And then I don't beat myself up at the end of the day for not getting many mixed revisions done or not, whatever. So
right. I do a master class at SUNY Purchase College remotely, and a lot of my students say, well, you have a manager, that's nice, but what do? I don't have a manager. And a lot of times I just remind them, like, I had to manage myself for 15 years before I got a manager. And that helps, because then when you are trying to collaborate with someone in that way, in a business sense, you know what you need, you know what you're looking for, and you're going to be a good partner for them too.
Yeah.
So I think starting that path on your own is
Yes.
makes you someone that everyone wants to work with in that way.
And in the end, management, booking agent, all these people, they work for you. And you have to drive that ship. So it's not like you just get management and all of a sudden, like, they're gonna figure shit out for you. So they're really just there to be like part of your team. Like, you have to provide the vision and the drive.
That's right.
I remember
Yeah.
I got a booking agent. I was like, sick. No more booking.
Time to
Hell
chill.
yeah, time to sit back.
Time to chill.
And I, if I could go back, I wish that we just like kept hustling and booking our own shows in between the tour offers that we got, because we were only playing the tours where we get like offered opening slots.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Totally. Two things to say about that. Yes, that is a very good point you have to remember, is like, yes. And I'm a big believer of like, things come to you when you're ready, or when even when I forget this, and then I'll have a moment where I'll be like freaking out, and I spend like 2 days wasting all my time being like, oh my God, and I'm going to get how am I going to do this? My t-shirt designs. Oh my God, I have a show in 3 days. How am I going to do my vocal exercise? Okay. And then I have to like, just, Rachel, stop, just get to work. And then like things will come. But even realizing this, like, yes, just because you have management, I mean, doesn't mean that you stop. The work is going to double. Like, you're just going to have more work. They're going to put more work on your plate, but they're just going to help you. Like, that was the last 2 weeks leading up to my release, but I just was, at that point though, it's like, okay, well, what can I offload to this person on my team? It was like, you guys need to take the call with the publicist. I don't care, whatever. Like, I have to do this, and this. Otherwise, and I'm not sleeping right now. So, but then you're realizing like, okay, I'll sleep tomorrow. But, I think also really good point about the booking agent. And I think something to remember, all of us as independent DIY artists, or even bands on labels, is like, you guys can do everything yourself now. You don't need a booking agent. Like, sometimes, I mean, yes, there's benefits to having an agent, but like, I don't know. I just keep pushing and doing as much as you possibly can by yourselves, because
no one's going
you'd be
to care about
surprised.
no one's going to care about your career more than you.
Exactly. But it's like, I have plenty of friends that have agents now and are getting terrible shows where they're like playing to nobody. I mean, they're playing nice venues, but it doesn't match up with where they're at as an artist, and it's like super frustrating for them. And they're, so like, just keep pushing, because you don't know, you might have a friend's band that blows up, and then they take you on the road with you, or you play 3 shows with them because they're your homies. And then again, it's all about that community and just being like, hey, I dig what you do. Like, let's join forces. I don't know.
Yeah. One of the things I will say that I really love about being creative is that as scary as it is when you have slow moments, we all do, myself included. I find that as soon as I sit down, and not every time, but when I'm on the job, that's when I get the call for the next job. It's so bizarre.
Yeah.
It's like when I'm not working, calls aren't coming in. But when I'm working, the phone starts to ring. It's
Right.
real weird. And I'm not necessarily saying it always happens, but for every time I'm in the studio working, there's a higher likelihood more calls for whatever reason.
Yeah, that's what.
Just testing you.
So
Yeah,
so maybe
totally.
get yourself busy in one way or another too can be.
It's like when that call comes, you gotta take it. You gotta walk through that door, and you might not be ready for it if you're not putting in the work and you're woodshedding. I find the same thing. Every time I go and sit and start practicing, it's like that gig you weren't even thinking about. Oh, guess what? You just gotta, these 4 shows for this tour that we pitched you on. Okay, cool. But I don't know that if I wasn't like, if I was still just worrying about how am I gonna get shows stuck on my head, if that wouldn't have happened.
I think that's a good message to leave everyone with. We could sit up here for hours. I know that you guys are going to be walking around. There's tons of great questions if you guys would like to talk to our panelists. But we have some amazing vendors and organizations downstairs. So can we give it up for our panel again one more time? Thank you guys for being a great audience.
Thank you all for being here.
I appreciate it. Thank you to Ryan. You want to come back up? I want to say thank you to Ryan and Doug.
Thank you guys for having us.
Absolutely.
Thank you,
Ryan's
guys.
going to say something else, and thank you guys for having me too.
Yes, thank you everyone for coming out today. Now we're going to disperse to the table portion of the event. So give everybody a second or two to get downstairs, and then we'll have a lot of the local organizations here that you can kind of just go talk and ask questions. You can kind of mingle with the panelists. and everyone here, and thank you for your time. So
Let's hear it for these guys in the Ice House. Thank you guys. What a cool event.